What's up, everyone? How you guys doing? And today we are talking about the rising star in Genshin Impact, a character that has been making a lot of headlines recently and growing to be more relevant in the game. And her name is Chevreuse. Released in 4.3, Chevreuse has been seen as a pretty good 4-star that doesn't really need a lot of constellations, but for the most part has been seen as a good option, but not a standout one. However, recent Abyss cycles and the release of new powerful DPSs that makes good use of a kit, Chevreuse has risen to become a noteworthy character in the meta. And obviously, the numbers don't lie. Having like sub 10% usage rate in Abyss has now shot up to about 23% as of the latest 5.6 Spiral Abyss. But what makes her so strong, and what is the secret formula that you need to use to get her up and running? Today, we'll talk about Kit, her builds, and her teams. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, Chevreuse is a polearm pyro character from Fontaine, and she has the Usia alignment. She mostly works as a support and healer, but with higher investments, especially into crit and attack, she can be used as a quick swap DPS, but mostly for this video, we'll go through her supportive capabilities because that's the main thing that you should build her for. So what is the main draw of Chevreuse? The very first thing that we will talk about is the A1 passive, Vanguard's Coordinated Tactics. Basically, this reduces enemies, electro and pyro resistance by 40% whenever they are hit by overload, which is basically pyro plus electro. This does come at a cost, as mentioned right at the top, that all characters need to be of pyro or electro elements. Now, that being said, Chevreuse does not need to be the person activating this for this 40% to trigger. At the same time, even though it is up there for 6 seconds, if you are able to apply overload constantly with like sub DPSs and a quick DPS, this can be upheld for a very long time. And basically, this is what makes Chevreuse very strong. It obviously gives you more damage to your pyro and electro DPS characters, and can be a very good replacement for like a character like Kazuha who uses the Verdescent set, and it can be a little bit harder to trigger like double swirl, for example, and with pyro electro, and in this case Chevreuse makes it a lot easier to trigger this condition. At the same time, her A4 passive gives the team with pyro and electro characters a massive attack boost up to 40% if Chevreuse is at 40k HP. This lasts for 30 seconds, which is a pretty long time, and the benefit is that this does not actually need full team of pyro or electro characters to activate. Yes, it only benefits those two elements, but let's say you put in a Farina in the team, this will still go on, right? The only condition is that you need to fire an overcharge ball, which you get by triggering overload, and then using the whole version of her elemental skill. And since we mentioned it in passing, we're talking about her A4 passive, let's talk about her elemental skill. Alright, basically this has two versions, a tap and a whole version. Tap version, simple, you just shoot straight at the enemy, while the whole version enters into aiming mode, and if let's say you have an overcharge ball, this is what triggers the A4 passive. It obviously has a bigger radius, it hits a lot bigger, and at the same time you can obviously just aim at someone, which is like pretty cool. Regardless of which version of the skill you use, after firing the shot, you will heal the active character based on Chevreuse max HP. Right, this happens periodically, so it happens over time, but it is a decent amount. Although I would say that if she's your only sustain, that means no other healers or shielders, it can be a little bit uncomfortable depending on which team you are running. Maybe it may not matter that much in a Clorinde team because Clorinde herself can self-sustain. And last but not least, her elemental burst that fires a bomb that then explodes into 8 cluster bombs. Doesn't really do a lot of off-field damage, so it's not really reliance for proccing overload off-field, but can be pretty decent for the extra damage. Also pretty important to keep up, especially if you have effects like the Noblesse Oblige that you want to burst as often as possible. Other than that, it isn't really the main part of a kit, unless you want, for one, as mentioned, have Noblesse on yourself, or secondly, you have her built as a quick swap DPS. And so as you can see, Chevreuse does have a lot of good going for her, right? Obviously making pyro electro characters hit harder is a big bonus, right? Especially since we're at the land of Netland with characters like Malvika coming out recently. She's obviously been a lot more valuable because she does buff their damage. That being said, there are obviously some cons to her. First and foremost, we talked about her team restrictions, which can be a little bit jarring, especially if you do not have these characters pulled or built. At the same time, Overload as a reaction can be a little bit awkward to play with, as it works well in single target content with bosses, but against AoE content it can be a little bit weird because the enemies get knocked back by Overload reaction, and then you have to end up getting to chase them because they are displaced by Overload. Lastly, as mentioned, we're talking about the elemental skill. Chevreuse can feel a little bit weird as a solo sustain, and even at C6, which gives her team-wide healing at the end of her skills, periodic single target healing, it still can be a little bit awkward, especially if you do not have characters that can self-sustain themselves. That being said, do not let those cons affect your thinking or your usage of Chevreuse. She's still an amazing character, as we have seen recently. That being said, Chevreuse can only do so much on her own. She's only as good as the teams that is built around her. We have gotten a crazy amount of new characters ever since her initial release. For main DPSs, one of the massive upgrades was seen with Raiden Shogun, who also managed to maintain the overload uptime very well. It also reduces Chevreuse ER needs, so that allows her to build other sets for other things that she wants to do. At the same time, even though Lini does want a lot of pyro in his team, that means that he only needs 2 pyro teammates to max his buff, and so the last slot can go to an off-fielder like Fischl, for example. Yoimiya is pretty okay as well, not really the best. She does have better teams in her Vape and Melt comps, but she can be pretty fine in these teams, especially because she doesn't really depend on the shielding as much in an Overload team. And for characters that do fine but not amazing with her, these include characters like Wu Tao, Paching, Yaimiko, who I can't find. Yaimiko's right over here. Yaimiko's actually okay. It's just that Yaimiko has insane ER needs that you really want to at least run a battery with her, so that's something to consider. And of course Sino as well. Most of these, if not all these characters, would prefer they would prefer like Aggravate or Quicken team comms. So generally they have their niches there. A lot of things changed after 4.3. In 4.4 we got Garmin, who's a pretty good 4-star DPS, but Arlecchino came in 4.6 and stole the show, right? Pretty good DPS, appreciated Chevreuse buffs, the attack buff as well. And while Arlecchino doesn't want healing, Chevreuse doesn't really heal that well, so that's kind of a moot point at that point of time. So yeah, Arlecchino's pretty strong with her. Clorinde is the same thing as well, works very well in multi-wave content. And then during the Netland era in 5.3, we got Malvika, who at the initial release, while Overload was a pretty good team comp, it didn't really synergize well with her burst mechanic, but afterwards we got Yansan, which obviously paired well with the the overloaded team comp. And lastly, Veressa, who also works very well with Electrocharge. I need to stop saying Electrocharge, with Overload, especially with that being one of, if not her best team. Another shout out goes out to Auroron, who, while Electrocharge works a lot better for him, in this team comp, he can still supply the Night Soul points for Malvika, while also providing pretty decent damage by himself. And I know we talked a lot about main DPSs, but the sub DPSs are also very important because they help maintain the electro and pyro off field. Obviously Xiangling, Pyro MC, Fischl, Yaimiko do very well. And then with supports, she also works very well with Iansan and Bennett in specific team comps. So yeah, we can see that we actually have a decent roster, while some people may prefer other reactions like electro charge or even still prefer quicken. We can still see that in many situations like with Beidou, in multi-wave content or multi-target content, we can see that there's a lot of potential. And the more characters that they release that are of electro or pyro, we can obviously see her value increase a lot further. So we've gone to great lengths talking about her team synergies and her kit, but how do you build Chevreuse? Now, for a support slash healer build, it's very simple. HP percent plus ER. That's mostly what you need to focus on. And then if you want to play her more as a quick swap DPS, then you start to focus on building in attack and crit substats for more damage. Also take note that if you are running a support build but using Favonius, you will want a crit rate circlet. In my opinion, the best artifact set for Chevreuse for overall team damage is the Noblesse Oblige. Basically gives you a 20% attack buff after using your elemental burst. Now, generally, if you do not use Bennett, she is seen as the best option to use. But it does also mean that you have to prioritize more ER because you want to burst once every rotation. That being said, she also has decent alternatives. If I were to go to the screen right here, she does have a decent option in the Songs of Days Past. Long story short, because it is a very long passive, the Songs of Days Past can provide extra damage based on the healing that she provides. It works similarly to how Shenhe's Icicles work, and so in AoE content, it gets used up pretty fast. More useful on C6 Chevreuse with the team-wide healing. So yeah, that's something to take note, especially for C6. Another good set that you can use, especially if you have Netland characters, is the Scroll of the Heroes in the City. That being said, if you have other Netland characters in your team, you will want to have this, especially if a sub DPS or support like Ian Sun or Auroron or even Pyro MC, right? Those characters will prefer this. So yeah, that's usually the consideration, because they only get 12% elemental damage bonus instead of the 40. Still a pretty decent option, especially if using Ben on the team and he's holding the Noblesse set. Tenacity is also pretty good because whenever you use the elemental skill, your attack will be able to be boosted for the entire team, which obviously works very well, especially since most characters of Electro and Pyro are attack scaling characters. At the same time, it is a HP plus 22p set, which means that helps to reach Chevreuse HP target. But if you really want the damage, Emblem of Sever Fate tends to be the best in slot because you get a lot of extra damage from building with energy recharge. That being said, other sets that can work pretty okay will be Golden Troop. That being said, usually Emblem is a lot better. You can also use sets like the Crimson Witch of Flames, which, I don't have any, which I've just realized, but it does give you not only the pyro damage bonus, but also increases the reaction damage as well. Do not be forced to build 4P sets if you're still starting out. Going 2Ps like HP or energy recharge for support, and then going for the attack or even like the pyro damage one for DPS builds will not be the worst thing in the world. Now for main stats, generally this really depends depending on your needs and also your weapon as well, but for the sense, it can go either HP, attack or ER. Attack is mostly for the DPS builds, whereas ER works best if you need to reach the energy requirements, especially if you do not have an ER weapon. This also is quite important if you're using the Noblesse set, for example, while HP does help you reach the desired health thresholds, especially if you have enough energy recharge from your substats. The same goes for the Goblet as well. More DPS ones like attack percent or pyro damage goes for the DPS builds, whereas for support builds, you will most likely, if not always, go for HP percent. And last but not least, depending on your weapon and also on what you're building, it really depends for the headpiece as well. Healing or HP percent for support, or crit rate if you're using Favonius, and then going for either crit rate or crit damage for a DPS build. As for substats, you can follow the same convention as the main stats, HP and ER if you're going for pure support, with a little bit of crit rate, especially if you're using Favonius, and then going for like attack percent, crit damage, crit rate if you're going for a DPS build. And the weapon also goes both ways. For supports, go for ER weapons or HP weapons, that depending on what your needs are. Most people, myself included, go for Favonius just to support the team as well. While the Black Tassel, right, a 3-star weapon, can be pretty good for hitting the HP threshold. The event weapon as well, you manage to get this like in like 4.5, I believe. The dialogues of the Desert Sages can work pretty okay. It helps provides HP and energy, and the fontaine craftable, which is the righteous reward or rightful reward, sorry, can help with HP and energy as well, but isn't really like a good choice unless you have C6. And then when it comes to the DPS options, very simple. You're just going for attack, crit, all that stuff, and generally all of them work pretty fine. A noteworthy inclusion to this, or noteworthy shout out, would be the new weapon for Escoffier. This weapon gives the team attack whenever healing. So while pre-C6 is only the main target, it does give the opportunity to give the entire team when you have the C6 on Chevreuse. So let's talk about Chevreuse Constellations. Now let me just say that Chevreuse does not need them. If you have C0, she's perfectly fine. The Constellations just give her some quality of life and some things that maybe help her if you're building her for DPS. Let's talk about C1 first, right? Her C1 basically gives, whenever you trigger Overload, the character that triggers it gets 6 energy. While it sounds nice on paper, it can be a little bit hard because this reaction can obviously happen very randomly, and you shouldn't really build your characters around this 6 energy, and it should be treated as a bonus. Now for the C2, basically gives your whole skill 2 additional procs, which scales off her attack, which is what her DPS scales off. So if you're playing a DPS build, this is a very good one. It also means that there's more instances of triggering the Favonius where you get the energy. C3 just increases the skill, which means more damage and also more healing. So C4 gives you an extra whole skill to use after using the elemental burst. It means that your skill doesn't go in cooldown from the first time. You can treat this as an extra an extra sacrificial weapon proc, and this lasts either 6 seconds or when you use the skill twice. So if you time it right, you could technically skill burst and then skill, but it means that you have to spend more time on field, and generally most people will just go with burst, skill, and then switch out. C5 increases the burst, which means more damage, and C6, this is a pretty decent one, where after the 12 seconds of the healing from the skill, sorry about that, you will be able to heal your whole team based off 10% of Chevreuse max HP once, and at the same time, whoever receives healing from Chevreuse gets 20% pyro damage and electro damage bonus. This maxes at 3 stacks, which means that you could technically get 60% pyro damage bonus or electro damage bonus. Now, this is more for the main character, the character is on field. So, for example, like Malvika, she's going to be the main character on field, so she can get the full bonus. But that means that your sub DPSs are able to get the 20%. Because they are being healed by the full team effect. Just like the A4 passive doesn't have the restriction of having full team or pyro or electro as well. Now let's go over teams. Teams is probably the most easiest part because we talked a lot about it quite a bit earlier, but a team is basically Overload, right? Depending on who you could use Clorinde, you could use a Raiden Shogun, you could use Malvika, you could use Veressa, you could use I don't know, like you could use Yanfei, you could use Diluc, right? Although Diluc may not the best name to mention. You could use Arlecchino, right? All these are good options. Generally for main DPSs, right? Pretty simple, right? Whoever does like good damage should be considered, right? As I mentioned, And then characters that I probably missed out, like Linny, I don't know, Mendea also works pretty well, I guess, right? With like Constellations. And then for the sub DPS, or even like other sub DPS options, let's talk about them first, right? Fischl works very well, Xiangling works very well, Pyro MC works pretty well, Auroron works pretty well, right? Beto in multi-target content works pretty well. Not say those. Lisa could work pretty okay generally. And then when you talk about like supportive options, obviously Kujo Sara can work pretty well. We have Yansan, who came out like a patch ago, works pretty well. Kuki Shinobu can help with healing, he works pretty well. Obviously Bennett works pretty well, right? So you can see that generally there is a lot that can, it is very straightforward, right? Have the characters be of either pyro or electro, and then just fit them according to your needs. I did mention that the A4 passive and C6 doesn't need the condition of having all pyro and electro characters, unlike the A1. It means that you could technically sneak in Furina for a lot of damage bonus. You could give in like Shilonen and Kazuha for their additional buffs and debuffs, right? The elemental rest shred that they can provide, which does make up for the loss of the 40% from not activating her A1 passive. So yeah, generally, there's some flex options, but generally for the most part, you will still want to go with the traditional overload team comms. So yeah, that's basically that when it comes to teams. It's probably the easiest one to go over. And so we're going to have another showcase in the current Spiral Abyss second floor, right, which is very notorious for having Netland enemies with the Night Soul or the Abyss Void shields. But we're going to use this team comp to actually shred through the floor, and Chevreuse is going to provide massive damage. Just as a quick look, because of for my builds, and if you have watched the previous video on the Spiral Blaze clears, it's basically the same team. But for the sake of it, let's just go through some of my artifacts very quickly, and also talking about the talents as well. This is Clorinde, who's going to be the main DPS for this team. And then we have where's this character called? Oh, it's right here. And then we have Fischl. Obviously works very well because of the off-field damage and the battery as well. She is on the stringless and also on 4-piece golden troop, which obviously helps her off-field damage. That's pretty nice. 1, 12, and 9. And then when we go on to Chevreuse, this is her build, obviously for Vonius lands. We have the 4-piece, Noblesse Oblige. If you watched the previous video, I did not change out my my timepiece, my sense, and yeah, I did not get the full piece effect. So with this showcase, we have her at full power. And also for to mention this, like, you don't really need to invest her that high. I have her at 166 or 196 because of the C3, but she does do the job very well. These are her stats. So yeah, she's not at the full 40 HP, but that's still pretty decent. And then for Xiangling, it's the same build as the previous video, giving her a lot of ER so that she's able to burst she's able to burst more often, right? These are her stats. She has an ER sense for this build, which still works very well because obviously she is on the emblem set. So yeah. Also C6, Chevreuse I showed is C4, and then Fischl is C6, and then Clorinde is at Constellation 0. So that's that. We'll get back after the showcase ends.
Time to testify. Into the shadows. As you wish, justice will prevail. No breakdown. Get them. Shoot on sight. Moving. Into the shadows. Shoot on sight. Justice will prevail. Final warning. Get them. Stop right there. Moving. Hunt them down. Wings of darkness. Drop your weapons. You asked for it. Into the shadows. Time to test it. By royal decree, final warning. Ice space. On reveal by hands right seal. Drop your weapons. Final warning. Moving. Time to testify.
Midnight Fantastic.
Stop right there. Get them. You asked for it. Into the shadows. Shoot on sight. Justice will protect space. Moving. Enough. Hunt them down. Shadow Raven. Surrender.
And so, to end this off, Chevreuse is a pretty strong character, especially if you want to play with the overload mechanic. She is, well, I won't say she's a must-have, but she's like damn important in those team counts for the extra damage. And as I mentioned, she's available all these for C0. So if you do have her and you do want to play with like Clorinde or Malvika or even Varessa in this team comp, it is a pretty good one, especially if you need Bennett or Kazuha or Shilona somewhere else, right? This is a very good alternative that you can use in the alternative chamber. So with that being said, thank you for watching this video, much appreciated. Try to write a script for my videos, try to make it more condensed, but I do go off script, I do talk a lot, and then now you guys hear from my voice, it is getting a little bit hoarse. So that being said, I really appreciate you guys coming in, appreciate you guys coming through, appreciate you guys being here. If you like this video, thumbs up, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And do note that I stream live on Twitch, link in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, be good to yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.